There are moments that never appear in official interviews. Moments that no carefully edited behind-the-scenes documentary can truly capture. Moments so simple that they quietly become unforgettable. What you're about to read is a completely story inspired by the world of filmmaking and imagination. It is not a report of real events. If you enjoy emotional character-driven stories that explore kindness, humility, and the invisible moments that shape people's lives, then stay until the very end because the final scene changes everything. Sometimes the loudest applause is not heard on a stage. Sometimes it happens inside a person's heart. And this is one of those stories. The morning had started like every other filming day. The studio gates opened before sunrise. Assistants hurried across the enormous set carrying costumes that had been pressed overnight. Lighting technicians adjusted giant lamps that turned darkness into daylight. Makeup artists quietly organized brushes, palettes, and mirrors while assistant directors checked schedules that looked impossible to complete before sunset. Everyone had become accustomed to the rhythm.
Coffee, scripts, camera checks,
Costume adjustments. Another exhausting day. The atmosphere was busy, but strangely peaceful. No one expected that before lunchtime the entire production would stop. Not because of equipment, not because of weather, not because of an emergency, but because of one quiet introduction. Zhang Linghe arrived earlier than usual. Normally, he greeted everyone with a polite smile before disappearing into makeup. That morning something was different. His smile looked warmer. His steps felt lighter. He carried no script in his hands. Instead, he kept checking the entrance of the studio every few minutes. Several crew members noticed. One assistant whispered that he looked nervous. Another joked that perhaps an important producer was visiting. The wardrobe team guessed maybe a famous director had arrived unexpectedly. Everyone continued working, but curiosity quietly spread through the studio. Even the camera operators exchanged confused glances. Who exactly was he waiting for? 20 minutes later, a modest black car slowly entered the parking area. It was not expensive. It attracted no attention. No security vehicles followed behind. No photographers appeared. No dramatic entrance. Just one ordinary vehicle stopping near the entrance. The driver stepped out first. Then an elderly woman slowly emerged. She wore simple clothing. Nothing luxurious. Nothing designed to impress anyone. Her smile carried the warmth of someone who had spent an entire lifetime caring more about people than appearances. She looked around the enormous studio with eyes filled with quiet amazement. She had heard stories about filming. She had seen photographs. But standing inside the place where imagination became reality felt completely different. Zhang Linghe immediately walked toward her. The smile that appeared on his face was unlike anything the crew had seen before. It was not the practiced smile actors use for cameras. It was not the polite smile reserved for interviews. It was the smile of a son. He gently held her hand, not because she needed help walking, but because it felt natural. For a brief second, the busy studio disappeared. Assistants stopped carrying equipment. Makeup artists paused in the middle of conversations. Even security guards quietly observed from a distance. There was something beautifully ordinary about the moment, and perhaps that was exactly what made it extraordinary. Instead of leading her directly toward his dressing room, he did something no one expected. He turned toward the hundreds of people working across the production. Then he smiled. "Everyone, may I have just a minute?" The studio gradually became quiet. People lowered cameras. Conversations faded. Even phones disappeared into pockets. No one wanted to interrupt. His voice remained calm. "There is someone very important I want all of you to meet today." The words sounded simple, but something about the way he spoke made everyone pay closer attention. He looked at the woman standing beside him. Then he gently said, "This is my mother." For 1 second, absolute silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Beautiful silence. The kind that happens when hundreds of people suddenly understand they are witnessing something genuine. Then applause slowly began. One person. Then another. Soon the entire soundstage echoed with applause that seemed to come from every direction. His mother looked completely surprised. She laughed softly while shaking her head as though she never expected strangers to welcome her with such kindness. Her eyes became emotional. She tried thanking everyone, but the applause continued. Some crew members smiled without realizing they were smiling. Others quietly looked away for a moment to hide their emotions. It was impossible not to feel something, because this was not celebrity. This was family. When the applause finally settled, Zhang Linghe continued speaking. I have spent years standing in front of cameras. People often congratulate me. They tell me I worked hard. They tell me I earned everything. But before anyone believed in me,
She did.
when I doubted myself, she didn't. When I failed, she never reminded me of failure. She reminded me to stand up again. If today I can stand here. It began with her. Nobody moved. Nobody rushed back to work. The assistant director, who usually worried about every lost second, simply stood quietly. Schedules suddenly seemed less important. His mother gently touched his arm. You don't have to say all this, she whispered. He smiled. Yes, I do, because I have spent years thanking everyone else. Today I wanted everyone to know who deserves my first thank you. The studio somehow became even quieter. Even those who had only met him a few weeks earlier suddenly understood something important. Behind every successful person is often someone whose name never appears in movie credits. Someone whose sacrifices remain invisible. Someone who never asks for recognition. His mother spent the next hour meeting members of the crew one by one. She thanked lighting technicians for working long hours. She complimented the costume department after seeing rows of carefully organized outfits. She laughed with makeup artists who explained how many brushes were required every single day. She asked camera operators whether their equipment was heavy. She thanked the cleaning staff for keeping everything spotless. She spoke to everyone exactly the same way. No one was more important. No one was less important. By lunchtime, something unexpected had happened. People no longer viewed her as the famous actor's mother. They simply viewed her as everyone's mother for the day. The catering team insisted she taste several dishes. The wardrobe department showed her handmade costume details invisible on camera. The prop designers demonstrated how ordinary objects became magical through creativity. She listened with genuine fascination, not pretending, not politely. She truly wanted to understand everyone's work. One veteran electrician quietly smiled. In over 30 years on film sets, he had met famous actors, award-winning directors, international producers. But very few family members had ever walked through the studio, making every single person feel appreciated. Word quietly spread across neighboring sound stages. People found reasons to pass through. Some simply wanted to greet her. Others wanted to shake her hand. Some admitted they had called their own parents during lunch after witnessing the morning's events. Without intending to, one quiet introduction had transformed the mood of an entire production. Filming resumed that afternoon. Yet something had changed. Actors seemed more relaxed. Crew members laughed more often. Mistakes that normally caused frustration were met with patience. The atmosphere felt lighter, almost as though everyone had been reminded why storytelling mattered in the first place. During a break between scenes, his mother watched silently from behind the monitors. She observed how dozens of people worked together with incredible precision. When the director finally shouted that the scene was perfect, everyone applauded. She smiled proudly, not because her son stood in front of the camera, but because she realized how many people stood behind it. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared behind the studio buildings, the crew gathered for one final group photograph. Originally, it had been planned as an ordinary production picture. Instead, someone suggested something different. Place his mother in the center. At first she refused. She insisted she had done nothing special. The crew insisted even more. When the photograph was finally taken, hundreds of smiles filled the frame. Not because they were instructed to smile, because they genuinely wanted to. Years later, many people might forget which scenes were filmed that day. They might forget which costumes were worn, which camera lenses were used, even which conversations happened between takes. But they would never forget the morning when an entire production paused to celebrate the woman whose greatest achievement had never appeared on a movie poster. She had simply raised a son who never forgot where he came from. Sometimes the most unforgettable scene on a film set is never recorded by a single camera. It lives only inside the memories of the people fortunate enough to witness it. And perhaps that is the most beautiful kind of story. Not the one that earns awards. Not the one that dominates headlines. But the one that quietly reminds people to call their parents. To appreciate those who believed in them before success arrived. To remember that behind every dream fulfilled is often an unseen hand offering encouragement through every season of doubt. In a world fascinated by fame, the greatest introduction is sometimes the simplest one. This is my mother. Those 4 words carried more emotion than any scripted speech ever could. If stories like this remind you that kindness still matters and that the greatest heroes are often the ones who never seek attention, share this story with someone you appreciate today. Leave a comment about the person who believed in you before anyone else did, and never forget that success shines brightest when gratitude walks beside it.